So now let's go ahead and create our first Amazon RDS database instance. So on databases on the left-hand side, you can just click on create database. Okay, so when we are on the screen, we have to select the database engine. So we have 6 engines types, and we have 2 database creation methods, would be standard create or easy create. Because I want to show you all the options, we're going to choose standard create, which is going to be longer, but we'll show you all you need to know for the exam. Now for the engine options, we have Aurora that we'll deal with later on, MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, Oracle, and Microsoft SQL Server. For simplicity's sake, right now I'm just going to use MySQL and go down with it. So we're going to use the version that is provided right here, MySQL 8.28, but whatever is the first selected is good enough for you. Next, we have templates to meet our use case. So if you wanted to have a free tier setup, you would click here, and this would pre-select some options for the free tiers. Or if you had a dev test environment, then this would pre-select options for dev test. And production, you have full control over every option. Now I'm going to use production as a template, but we'll modify every option to be within the free tier. But I'm showing you this so that we can have a look at all the options one by one. So first, for availability and durability. We have 3 options. We have single DB instance, multi-AZ, or multi-AZ DB cluster. So because we want to remain within the free tier, we're going to use single DB instance. But if you want to have a standby database instance, you would use a multi-AZ type of option. Now for the DB identifier, we're going to use database 1. The credential is admin, and the password, I'm going to use a password here that I'm just going to enter as we go. Okay. Next, for the instance configuration, this is the size of the underlying EC2 instance. So in that case, we can have standard classes or memory optimized classes or burstable classes. And within it, you can choose whatever instance type you want with different characteristics. Now, to remain within the free tier, I'm going to use a burstable class. I will include previous generation classes and choose DB T2 micro, which is within the free tier. Now for storage type, if you are in production, you're going to use an IO1 type of EBS volume, but as we ran within the free tier, I want to use a GP2 type of volume, which is lower performance, and we'll use maybe 20 gigabytes of allocated storage. Now we can also enable storage autoscaling, which will automatically increase the size of the EBS volume in case we are starting to near a threshold. And what is the maximum amount of storage we want in case we enable autoscaling? Let's say 1000 gigabytes. Now for connectivity, we have the option to connect to what's called an EC2 compute resource. So this is in case you wanted to make sure that there is connectivity between a specified EC2 instance and your RDS database. You would just choose it in this list, and then the configuration in terms of networking would be done automatically. So you don't have to handle security groups, etc., which is very helpful when you're a beginner. But we're going to look at all the options. So I'm going to say don't connect to an EC2 compute resource. Therefore, we have to deploy in a specified VPC, and then we have to specify a subnet group, and then whether or not we want public access to the database. So I'm going to say yes, because I want to access this database from my own computer. Next, we need to choose or to create a security group. So I'm going to create a new security group, and the name is going to be demo database MySQL. In terms of AZ preference, we could set one, but no need. And as you can see, the port to connect to the database on MySQL is 3306. In terms of database authentication, we have 3 mechanisms. The first one is to use a username and password. This is what we'll be using. But we can also enable IAM database authentication to have IAM users and roles directly access RDS, or we can enable Kerberos. But right now, I'm going to leave it as password authentication. We can enable monitoring, and enhanced monitoring gives you a 60-second granularity on your resources, but I can disable it right now. And we can specify some additional database configuration. So for the initial database name, I'm just going to enter MyDB. Then we can enable or disable backups. So backups are automated, and we can have a backup retention period of 1 to 35 days. And if I said 0, then it will just completely disable them. So let's leave it at 7. And then for backup window, we can choose a specific time window where the backups will be done, or no preference. Then we can export the logs into CloudWatch logs. For example, you can export the audit log from RDS into CloudWatch logs for long-term retention. Then, do we want to have a maintenance window for the minor version upgrades? And if so, what is a window you want to have? And do you want to have deletion protection? Is this to protect the database from being accidentally deleted? Okay, so now as you can see, we have some DB cost of $17 per month, even though I told you this is within the free tier, so it's not reflected right here. But if you use a DB T2 micro type, then you will have a free tier for this, even though it says here 17.34 US dollars. So when you're done, just create this database. So while my database is being created, let's go ahead and download SQL Electron. And this is a SQL client that we're going to use to connect to our database. So very simple, you're going to click on Download GUI and then click on it. Take the latest version for whatever platform you have. So you have latest Windows, and then for Mac it's going to be a DMG. So I'm going to do this one, then open it and install it. Okay, so my database is now created. It took a little bit of time, and now, as you can see, it is available. And so what I'm going to show you are a few options. So first of all, we have the endpoint right here and the port 3306, and it's linked to this security group. And this security group, if we click on it and look at the inbound rules, we can see that we have an inbound rule here on TCP port 3306. So that's great, okay? Coming from just my IP address. Okay. So you should, of course, modify this security group if you have problem connecting to your database instance to maybe have it to anywhere IPv4. Okay, so now let's take this endpoint and we're going to connect to it using SQL Electron. So using SQL Electron, I'm going to add a new database. I'll call it RDS demo. It's a database of type MySQL. And then for the server address, I'm going to enter what I have right here on port 3306. The user is admin and the password for me was password. And then the initial database is MyDB, as I entered it from before. Let's click on tests, and the connection is successful. If it's not successful, please have a look whether or not your database was set to be a public database, number one, and number two, have a look at your security group settings to make sure that your IP is allowed in. So let's save this and connect to our database. And now I'm connected into my database directly into MyDB, which was the database that was created. And in here, I could go ahead and enter some create table statements. So create table, my table, and then just a name of varchar 20 and a first name of varchar 20. So it's just a very quick statement just to show you how SQL works, but this is definitely out of scope for the exam. Execute this. So now we have my table that has been created, and then we don't have any content in it, okay? But you could have an insert statement to insert some data into your table. So you would say, for example, enter the value Marek, and then the value here, Stefan. Execute this. And then if you click on select rows, then you see that my table has my name and my first name to be Marek and Stefan. So this is how you would use a RDS database with MySQL. But again, out of scope of the exam, I just want to show you the full picture of using SQL Electron. So back in here, my RDS database is fully managed. So this is great. We can use it. This is amazing. Other things we can do that are worthy are to create a read replica directly from this database. So we can create a read replica. And then this read replica would allow us to have more read capacity for our database, which would be very, very helpful. And do we want whether or not that database to be multi-AZ for recovery purposes? So I'll keep it as no and cancel it. Next, we can have a look at monitoring. And monitoring, for example, could show us the CPU utilization. And as we can see, well, the CPU utilization is monitored by my database, and we can monitor this, for example, for scaling our database if in case we have too many connections into it. We can have a look at the database connection count as well to see how many clients are connected into our database, and a lot of metrics overall, okay? Other things you can do with RDS is around creating snapshots. So you can take a snapshot, and this will snapshot your database, and you can restore it wherever you want. You can restore to a point in time for your database, or you can even migrate a snapshot if you wanted to migrate a snapshot into a different region, for example. So all these are a bunch of options that we can use. But as we can see, the whole power of RDS is to manage the database for us, to have read replicas, multi-AZ, we can increase the instance type as we go along and so on. And that's all comes very handy from a managed service perspective. So you've seen all you need to know for your RDS database. I hope you liked it. And just to finish this off, please make sure to delete the database. So to delete it, first you need to remove the termination protection. So you go to modify, and then at the very bottom, you will scroll down and find the delete protection settings. So here it is. We'll disable it, press on continue, and then apply immediately. And then once the delete protection is done, you can go ahead and delete this database. You can remove creating a final snapshot and then say delete me and acknowledge the fact that upon deletion, everything will be lost. Click on delete and you're good to go. So that's it for this lecture. I hope you liked it and I will see you in the next lecture.